Alright, this is just picking up where I left off on part 1, and on part 1 I did cut the tenons on the end of some of the rails there, and now it's time to go back through and start cutting the mortises into the legs and the uprights. And you can see this is a fairly tall piece. It's over 6 inches, like 7 inches tall, and there's no way you can use the mortise jig hold downs that come with it. So I just set up a piece of aluminum angle iron and clamp into that to use that to hold everything in place while I drill it. And as always, the first pocket that you put in there, the drill really does have a tendency to stick and stuff. So you have to have it clamped down good, and most of the time it's going to move on you anyway. So I just use some of these big hand screw clamps to hold it, and they are kind of a pain. They take a lot of pressure on your wrists and stuff, especially if you got arthritis coming on them and stuff. So it is, it does take a while to do it, but you do have to clamp it between each one. And I did wind up using a 3/8 square mortise bit here because it was the only sharp one that I had. So it's going to take a while. Each of these is going to take 3 passes on it. But you can see pretty much I set up and I'm doing the first pass on it, and just make sure that everything's in line with the the mark that you put on there for the location of it. And then I have a top and a bottom one in each of these rails, so I'm just going to slide it down and just start on the other end of it after I do the first batch on the top one. And then the same thing, I'll throw the leg from the other side on there, and just while this is set up, I'll just run that first row, and then I'll go back and I'll shift the fence later. So this is kind of a boring job. It does take quite a while. You want to make sure that you're just right on the line or inside of it, just a hair, because you can always clean it out a little bit later, but you just can't put wood back in there. So you want to make sure that you have a nice tight fit when you go together. As you can see, it's a great way to drill a square hole here. These drill bits do work. There is a little bit of clearance. You can see the bits down a little further than the tip of the square there. And that does not give you a perfectly flat bottom on your pocket, so you have to do some cleaning out. And I usually leave it a little bit deeper when I'm doing it, so that there's some room for the glue to flow into too. So there it is. The first row is complete on both of those, and then I had to go back and do the other side. And this did turn out being a whole day. And there you can see I'm working on I flipped everything around and moved the fence, and I'm working on the second set there. And again, it's just it's a slow job. If I had a little bit bigger bit, it would go quicker. I could do it in 2 rows, but then it would take a little more force and pressure too. So it's a trade-off. And once I did that, I just went to the center section there, and I did each end of it, and then I was able to just pop the that part out that's left in there with the chisel, and just clean it up slightly with the chisel to get all the remnants of it out. So there's what it looks like. You can see the bottom of it's definitely not perfect, and a little bit of roughness on the walls, but we'll clean that up later. And here it is. I'll go back to do the final fitting of it. Always try to stay just a hair inside the line when you do it. You can see it's real tight. And at this point in time, you can just go back with a nice sharp chisel and clean out all the fuzz that's in there and stuff. And if you marked everything right, it'll be a perfect fit. That one there I just cleaned out, and there you can see it's wiggled in there nice and tight, so that's a perfect fit. Everything lines up good, so that one's good. And then it's time to just go back through and fit them all. There's basically 4 of these pockets in each of the legs and these front legs. So I got the I'm working on the cross pieces now. and just gonna pull it together. When you go to put the second side on, you can't wiggle it anymore. You really have to use a clamp if it's a good tight fit to get it to go together. Or you can use a hammer too, but if you can't wiggle it, it doesn't slide together easy. So there it is. There's the back of the bench there, the legs for the back. And then at the same time, I took and I moved that hydroponic grow tent down in my basement and set up my 3D printer in there. I've got that chair on in there, cranking out the parts for holding tools on the bench. All my clamps and everything will be mounted on the side. And this enclosure really turned out nice. It keeps everything nice and warm, and it keeps it quiet and everything else. So that's running in the background while I'm doing this, and I just go back and check it every once in a while. Then it's time to start doing the other set, front to back set of mortises in here. And you can see I did receive that set of the armor tool clamps now, and I'm using that to hold down the parts, and it's a lot easier on my wrists and stuff. So they do work good, and doing these, from here on in, I used them for all the rest of the mortises I cut. So they did get a couple hundred cycles each with no problem whatsoever. So they do work good, and no failures or anything. They're much better than those Craig clamps ever were. Now, one thing I did run into, I'll show you in a second, is I was using the clamps upside down here. Basically, I'll show you. The handle pulled out of my drill press. I had to go back and super glue that in. The threads are kind of half stripped out, but recovered from that. And I'll show you. I was using these clamps kind of upside down because I actually did pinch two of my fingers in them by trying to squeeze them as I was using them here. But you can see they do hold it down good, and they work good for stuff like this. And the same thing, these are a little bit shallower. These are only a little bit over an inch deep, these pockets. And I did actually make them longer right up to the end of the part too, but same thing, I had to do 3 passes on them. And just keep stepping it to 3/8 of an inch. So there's where I caught my finger. I took a chunk out of the tip of that finger, you can see, and the one on the other hand I actually got a couple minutes before. I just wasn't paying attention that when you go to squeeze them, if you got the handle up like that, there's a little thing there that flips over really hard when they lock, and if your finger's in there, it tears a chunk off of it. And if you turn them upside down like this, there's no way you can get your finger in that area. So, that's one tip if you're going to use these things. Always push down on them like that so you don't wind up with electrical tape on your fingers to stop the bleeding. But, they do work good, but you do have to be careful because once they snap in place to lock, that mechanism, if you're holding it like that, your finger can get right around into it when you squeeze, and if you hold it like that, it can't. So that's one little tip that I did learn. And after I did flip them, I haven't had a problem since. So back to doing a couple more of these mortise pockets. And I figured by doing it this way with all the mortise and tenons in the corners and stuff, everything would be locked together good and solid, and there wouldn't be any rock or give in the frame later. So and there's what that one looks like. You can see it still needs a little bit of cleaning up, and here's one part coming off the 3D printer now. That one just finished up. That's about a 5-hour part there, and you can see I've got about 100 hours on this printer now, and it's I went through and tightened everything up again, and it's really printing nice. And that bed is just pretty amazing how easy everything just peels off it when it cools. So back over into the shop, and you can see I've got those side stretchers in there now, and everything's a little bit oversized when I start out to mark it out and make it fit here, and I'm just starting to to lay out the length of them now and get ready to cut them. And there's an old 1950s vise I've got that I'm going to be using again. And like I said, it's back and forth to keep the 3D printer going and just check on it every once in a while. And I will say that tent really does a great job of controlling the temperature for it. So now I got those side rails cut down, and you can see I cut the tenons on there. And I'm just going to go back and mark the mortise pockets on the front legs here. So I just, I like to cut the tenon first and then go back and line everything up exactly where I want it. You can see I clamped a block of wood to line it on there. And then, get an exact marking on there and then go back over to the drill press and cut just on or barely inside the line. And these again are deeper ones too, so it does take a little longer to drill these. And I got the sides cut down. Now it's time to go back and start working on the actual the piece stretcher across the front of it. And the same thing, I got the dado blade on the table saw here, and I'm just going to do multiple passes because my dado can only go a little bit over 3/4 wide, and these are 1.5 inches or a little bit more width that I need to cut. So I just do a couple passes against a stop block on the fence there, you can see, and then I'll just keep flipping it, and hopefully that'll eliminate any tear out the way that I'm going, the direction and sides that I started on. And once I got that done, I could go back and mark the mortises across the front of the frame here. It's the same thing, just just go back and step them and drill them until they're all done. And again, a little bit of cleanup when everything's done. And I tell you what, I find that little laminate flooring hammer to be really handy for chisels. It just works perfect when you the right weight, and it's got that little rubber tip on it, and it just works perfect for them. And now I'm just going to go back and do the other side of the front there. And these actually are some pretty big and heavy pieces. You can see they're like, this one's like 2 by 6. And it's all solid ash. So, they are fairly heavy pieces to work with. Down to the last leg and last corner here, and it's same thing, just multiple rows to clean it up. And there's the one side all together, one leg, and look at the other side. This is what it looks like before you put the leg on, how they fit together. And there it is with the leg in place, and everything's just kind of clamped in place to test it and check for squareness and stuff. And so far everything is really perfect. Now I've got this old 1950s vise that I was given years ago, and it's a extremely heavy-duty vise. The thing must weigh close to 50 pounds. It's very heavy, and it's a quick release. I'm going to be making a new handle for it and stuff, but I'm trying to fit that into the corner of the frame here. So I marked out what has to be cut out for it, and I thought at first that I could just drill 3 holes and get a nice tight fit on it with the shape of the bottom of it. But that didn't turn out to be so. I had to go back and do a lot of sanding and grinding and filing to get a perfect fit. So I got that drilled out, and then I had to cut out the area the vise is going in, and went over to the table saw, and I cut one side. And then in a cut like this, a blind cut, you never want to cut both sides, because that piece will bind in there and something will go flying. I mean, it's all jam up and it'll send a piece flying out of there. So I'm just going to clamp a little backup scrap piece on there to hold it in place until the cut is done. and just cut through and don't pull it back, whatever you do. And once the saw blade stops, you can remove the part there. So I did wind up hacking away, a good deal of the front, and I cut away even more there, just trying to fit it in and get everything to fit tight in place there, because this whole top here is going to be a downdraft table also, so I can't have many leaks in here. So there it is. Everything's fit now, and I had to make some backup blocks and stuff. I'll show you in a second, but I'm going to start gluing the frame up here. Now with mortise and tenon joinery, I like to kind of do one at a time if I can, and I'll get the glue spread in the pocket there, and also try to spread it on the tenon in the shoulder there that go together, and get everything lined up and clamp. And this is real heavy stuff, so I'm not going to mess with doing more than one at a time if I don't have to. Then go back, make sure everything's perfectly square, and I'm putting some 18 gauge 2-inch pins in each of these joints also to help hold them together and keep them from ever getting wobbly. I got the one side on, and back again to the other side, same thing. Fill the pocket with glue and get the whole tenon there, and the shoulders coated with glue. And this side is really not much to clamp to because of that missing piece for the vise, but there's another strap going across the bottom to strengthen it again. But still, you figure that's like over a 2x2 piece of ash here, so that's still pretty strong what's left. So same thing, I got it all clamped together now, and I'll just go back and check everything to make sure it's perfectly square at this point, because just can't get it apart once that glue dries. And then I'm gonna just throw a couple of those 18 gauge brad nails in there. Now they had that top cleaned off, I just took a quick look at it. You can see where that maple's not really a super hard maple on it. You can see a lot of marks from me working. But so back to getting the front to back stretchers there glued in place, and I actually kind of put a letter on each of them to make sure I'm putting them together right, and actually put a letter inside the hole with a Sharpie, and that way I know I've got the parts all right. And again, I'm just doing it one at a time, and making sure everything's perfectly square, and then just a couple of those brad nails in it. And then I glued up the back section there, and same thing. This one I glued them both at the same time to get everything pretty much aligned there. And it's time to glue that right onto the front section. And I've got glue in all the mortise and tenon joints there, and I'm just gonna slide them together. Everything just fits so perfect. I got really lucky with all these joints. I did put a little wax paper down under there so any run out glue wouldn't stick to the tops that I'm working on. It's the only big flat surface I have left in my shop, so I'm kind of working on top of myself here. So there it is. That's basically what the outside of the frame looks like, and it's all made out of ash that I milled in my backyard there years ago. So this is a real good use for it. And I did bring in a little more ash, you can see for the rest of it. And here's some of the clamp brackets that I've got made. These are 3D printed, and this is for my little F-type clamps here. You can see it holds a dozen of them. And they're going to mount in the pockets in the wall there to have all my clamps real handy. And I do have some neoprene sponge pads there I'm going to laser cut to pad it so there'll be no noise, when you're pounding on stuff. And then these are the brackets that I 3D printed for the armor tool clamps. And all they are, there's like a backing plate that kind of aligns them and locates them, and there's a neoprene strip that isolates vibration, and then there's just some clamp brackets that go onto this, and that actually spaces everything out and keeps things from rocking. And there's the prototypes I started with just to get an idea, and I do have some problems and stuff, but you've got to work out things like this. And there's the first one that I printed that was a total disaster, but it gave me a start, something to look at and play with, and this is what I wound up with in the end. And I did print it so I could put a screw through the center of it, because layers will separate if you put a lot of force on a 3D printed part in this direction. So I figured I'd just print in a nut holder in the back and just put a screw through there, so no matter how hard I banged on it or yanked it or anything, it would still, it wouldn't break off. And there's basically what they look like, what it's going to look like mounted on the side of the bench, and they will hold the 3-inch or the 6-inch clamps, and they just kind of snap into place and lock in place like that, and the rubber will prevent vibration or movement. So that's how I'm gonna be mounting these clamps. And I do have a lot more brackets to be printing out and coming up with for other items too that'll be mounted right on the bench. But these are the first ones, and it looks like they're going to work out pretty good. So now that the glue's all dried, clamps are all off and everything, it's time to go back over all the edges that are exposed and put a chamfer on them. And now I have to, I've been working with the top up, and I have to take this frame off and flip the top so I can really start putting everything together. So it is getting really fairly heavy. I was pretty amazed when I went to drag it off there and flip it over. So I flipped that, and then I flipped the top, and this is the first time I looked at the back of this one top here. And you can see one top is perfect on the back, but the other one actually is torn out behind every hole where they drilled it. I just couldn't believe it, how they did not use a backing on this when they drilled it. Looks like it was made in a completely different factory. The one was really high quality, and this one here, it just looks like somebody went through with a hand drill and just tore it out, and it just looks like shit on the back. Luckily, it doesn't affect it functionally, but the quality, I was really disappointed in it when I did notice that. I wish I had seen it when I first opened it before I started modifying it. I would have probably given them hell and, tried to send it back, but now this is what it is. So, you can see the pieces, just all kinds of pieces ready to chip off and stuff. So I guess that's what you take a hit and miss quality when you buy Chinese stuff. One was perfect and the other one looked like this. Now I did make a hard maple backup plate for the vise there, for a spacer, and to get everything level on it. So I'm just kind of screwing that to the bottom there, and there's a little front stand there too for an edge on it, with a gap for tabletop movement in front and back of it. And then I clamped on a backing piece so I wouldn't have any tear out, and I went through and marked the mounting bolt holes for the vise and drilled both of them through the top from the bottom. Now I still have to counter bore them from the other side, and I'll show you in a little while exactly how I did that. But this is just basically to, start fitting the vise in place and get everything bolted and make sure it's going to smooth and there'll be clearance. And you can see that screw on this thing is like over 1.25 inch diameter, and the two rods are like 7/8 diameter. So it is a really heavy vise that opens 12 inches. And then I've got some side fillers to put in there, and I'm just going to do some Craig pocket hole screws here. And for narrow stuff like this, is this little extra piece for the 320 jig really does work good. Real easy to locate, put on there, and clamp in place and drill the holes like this. So all these pieces are going to do is they're going to fill in the side so that I can get my recessed areas for mounting clamps, and also at the same time everything has to be sealed. because this is going to be a downdraft table. Also, I'm using the holes in it for downdraft. Yet I need 6 inches of clearance between the tabletop and the shelf in here to be able to use those dog type clamps. So I got a piece made up, basically a filler piece for each side here that goes in place, and just gonna glue that and clamp it in place, and then use some of the Kreg screws to hold it. Make sure, just make sure everything's aligned as I clamp it in place here. And a couple pocket hole screws into there, and like all these little pocket hole screws and stuff do add a lot of strength to the frame in the end, also to keep it from ever racking. And then the other side had to be cut out to clear the vise. You can see there I had to notch a little bit out, but that's where the 4-inch dust collector hose is going to come out of it. I'm going to 3D print a special fitting to go in there. So I got that in place, and then down under the center of it, I'm running 2 1-inch pieces of ash and like a ladder structure to help support the center from ever sagging. So I'm just using some Kreg screws to mount that to the frame on each end. There's 2 pieces that are spaced out with some blocks here, and everything is all glued and actually screwed together to really make it stiff. And there you can see what that looks like, all glued and screwed in place there. So it's got really good support under the tabletop there. And now it's time to cut the side panels. This is some of that 1/2-inch plywood from Home Depot. It's fairly flat. It's not the most perfect plywood, but it's what you find locally. I was able to cut the width of the saw, but then I couldn't cross cut it because of that stand I've got in the way, so had to use the just a guide and the handsaw. Now these panels go in the side here and fill in, and there's a groove up the vert right there that I cut when I made those back pieces there, and I cut it at 12 millimeters, figuring most plywood is 12 millimeters, and luckily it was just a perfect fit for the sheets that I picked up. So this again adds structural strength to the frame here. You can see how this is gonna kind of lock the legs so that they just can't move anymore. At the same time, it's going to give me a place to mount all the clamps and hardware and everything that I do use constantly on the bench, and I'm always looking around the shop for and walking around when I'm trying to assemble something. So, it's all going to be hanging right there. As you can see, I'm really kind of squeezed in here in a corner, kind of running out of room and stuff with the right next to the saw and everything. So I'll be glad when I get this bench done so I can actually use it and have some extra space. So I want to just lock that in place nice and tight up in that groove in the front to make sure everything is pulled square, because I know I did, cut that plywood perfectly square there. And it's all on long grain of the ash, so nothing's going to move later. So now I'm just going to go back through, and I'm using 18 gauge narrow crown staples to put this in place. Putting one of them about every 2 inches there, so between the glue and that, it'll never come apart. Just double check everything again, and then just run down through and put the staples in. So that side's done, and it's time to just go back and repeat the process for the other side. And this is like a 5-foot sheet that I'm cutting down here, so you can see I'm kind of backed up against the bench, and just kind of out of room at this moment. But for the price, this is, you know, pretty nice plywood. I wish I could find some Baltic birch locally, but this'll do the job. They call it some kind of a just call it whitewood plywood or something like that. Sand ply whitewood or something, and you know, it does have a real nice finish on it. Veneer's not that thick on it. You have to be careful, but for what I'm using it for, it's fine. Same thing, I gotta get it locked in that groove in the front, and you can see back there it's cut out in the corner there for the vise, and that's where there's going to be a 3D printed adapter for the 4-inch dust hose to come in. So I got that in place, and then I went back, put some fillers in the front there, and got everything all glued together and stapled or brad nailed together there. So these are the recessed areas on the side where the tools and you know, clamps are going to hang. And it's time to drag it off of there one more time so I can start finishing the top of it. And this thing is really getting heavy now. Pretty amazing how much a chunk of ash weighs. But I was able to get it down and flip it over and be able to work on it. Biggest thing is when you're doing something like this in a shop, you're you know, using up whatever little space you've got left, and everything else has got to be just shoved out of the way for now. I'm guessing this thing's well over 200 pounds at this point in time. But there you see, that's a basic frame, what it's going to look like. It's extremely rigid, and you know, nothing moves. It's really nice and solid now, so I'm real happy with the way it's coming out. And it's time to go back through and get everything all sanded on the top here. That's going to mate on that the butcher block. And you can see there's all grooves in there for putting the clamps in later, and this is basically, you know, what it looks like. And I'm just going to go around here now and put some polyurethane on the top. And I'm using that polyacrylic, again, that I use on everything. I had part of a can left over. So I just put 2 coats on everything that I won't be able to get to easily later. Just put 1 coat on, and you have to sand with 220 grit to make the second coat stick. And, you know, before I knew it, it was all done, and everything is ready to go back together. Then at the same time, I took that polyacrylic and all those chipped out pieces, I pulled out all the loose ones, and you know, whenever you push a dog through, it tears more out and stuff. So I went back and I tried to put a couple coats on each of those tear out areas too, to at least make it so moisture won't get in there and stuff. What a piece of garbage. Can't believe that they you know, one came out so nice and the other one looked like this. And then there's that hard maple blocks that I put in there. I'm going to just throw a couple coats on them also. And that maple that grew in my backyard is a heck of a lot harder than these tops are. Now, I told you I had to put some counter bores for the carriage bolts up in the top there. And what I did is I just took a 3/4 inch hole and I bored it in a piece of wood, and I put the actual carriage bolt in position with the head sticking down, and used that to center the hole in my piece of wood. And then I went back with a bit, drilled the counter bore, and there it is. You can see that's a 3/4 diameter. And then I was able to just push the carriage bolt head right up in there, and it was all perfectly centered. Now it's time to get this back up on top for the last time here. It's going together. I did put some foam on there to try to protect that edge from getting damaged. And it was pretty funny. I got lucky because as I picked it up there and started rolling it forward, the foam actually got caught on the bottom of it and provided a cushion, but it also turned itself right into a like a wheel, like a big piece of pipe. It just, you can see there, it just curled up so everything would roll on it. That was pretty lucky that happened. It made it easier to get everything aligned. And now I was able to get all the bottom sections, a couple coats on there. I'm just doing one coat, sanding it with 220, and then throwing a second coat on for now. And once everything's done in the end, I'll sand it one more time and put a third coat on. And it's time to get the vise located. There's my air seal there. I cut some blocks of foam to fit perfectly in the vise because, you know, as I said, this is a downdraft table up here also, so I want to make sure I don't have any leaks. And I just left enough room on everything to get that in there and get that mounted properly. Then there's the two carriage bolts that go through from the back. And once that's bolted down, I made another air block to go in there, seal the top off or the bottom off there, and everything, you know, still moved good, but it had a fairly decent seal on it. And the front of this vise has two holes, and they're like a 1/4 inch diameter wood screws that actually go into the front of the bench there. So I just put them in temporarily, and once the polyurethane was dry, I went back and I took some of that orange paint. This is the same paint I used on my router table. I want to make everything matching here, so I went back and I started putting a coat of that on. It actually wound up taking 3 coats of it in each of these sides here with a sanding between them. And there you can see it's going to match the router table when it's all done. And got those anti-vibration pads mounted on the bottom there. I had to cut them and super glue them on and put a couple brads to hold them. And then I started putting some of these tabletop clamps on. I didn't quite have enough. I still have more coming, but you know, I just started now, and you can see those grooves I cut around everything. The little dados that I cut on all those inner pieces there allow me to lock down the tabletop there, and these clamps allow everything to move because this table will probably move back and forth at least a 1/4 inch over the 48 inch width. So they're all getting screwed down, and those sides are actually blocking a couple of them, so I got to use that little impact right angle attachment with the bit on it to get those screws in. Tight fit, but you know, it does work. I don't know how long it'll last using it for an impact. And then I went back and I made 2 new wild cherry pads for the vise there. So I'm going to just do the final install of those screws. And they go right through these pads that kind of hold the pads in place and clamps the whole vise to the bench. And you can pretty much see that this vise opens like 12 inches. It's just a monster vise, and you know, it'll be a nice one to have on the bench. And it does have a dog, one of those pull-up dogs on it, so that'll help. So that's all done, and I made a base strip to go across there and strengthen everything. And then again, got some Craig pocket hole screws on 2 sides to pull that in there. And the seal seals everything in perfectly, and pretty amazing the different colors that you get in ash. I picked this piece a little bit whiter. I wanted some contrast, and I did put some polyurethane on it before putting it in place. So that kind of seals up the front there, and this will be a spot where I can put a stool and stuff like that when I get done. And that back side of it actually is going to have pull-out drawers in it. So I'm just going to cut this video here because it's actually getting way too long, and hopefully the next video I'll be able to pretty much finish it up, I think. So you know, this kind of gives you an idea exactly where I am right at this point in time. And then again, always time to go out and light up the grill and throw on a batch of wings and do some hickory smoked hot wings that are, you know, really great treat. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.